UCB Life Issues with Paul Hammond.
And as always, a very warm welcome to this week's Life Issues. Now, a little while ago, someone got in touch to say, have you noticed these days, in all walks of life, it is more and more common for those responsible for things that go wrong to fail to take responsibility for their actions, or worse, to hide behind blame shifting and cover-ups. We see this not just in government, but also in other major institutions such as church denominations, the post office, and maybe even closer to home in our own lives. Is this, our listener asked, a topic for Life Issues? And we thought, well, actually, maybe it is, because it does seem that people are more willing to dodge responsibility for their actions these days, doesn't it? To come up with excuses, to plead ignorance. But then again, maybe humanity has always been like that. After all, Adam blamed Eve, and Eve blamed the serpent, and well, there was nobody else left for the serpent to blame. But then when God said to Cain, "Where is your brother?" he said, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Well, that apple didn't fall far from the tree, did it? So what does it mean to take responsibility for our actions? What does it do if we don't? What about accusations against church leaders? Because the church hasn't always dealt forthrightly with those, has it? So how does it change us if we do? And in a world where we are very willing to harangue the politicians when they are caught in a lie, what about the plank in our own eye? My guest to explore this today is a former government minister, Tory MP, and also, for a short period, an occupant of a room at Her Majesty's pleasure. He's gone on to become an Anglican minister and chaplain at Pentonville Prison. He's a campaigner for prison reform and co-founder of a charity committed to the care, resettlement and rehabilitation of offenders. He is the Revd Jonathan Aitken. Jonathan, welcome to Life Issues.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Let's just start about the importance of responsibility, taking responsibility for our actions, because I would imagine, not only through your own experience, but also within the context of what you do as a chaplain, for an offender, someone who commits a crime, to then go around and turn their life around, accepting responsibility for action is an essential element of that, isn't it?
Yes. I think if an offender, or even a non-offender, who's made a mistake doesn't take responsibility for it, doesn't fess up, preferably to the people he's harmed or she's harmed, but above all to God, if they don't do that, they're not really going to move forward on the road to rebuilding their lives. And I have been a prisoner myself, and I've obviously seen a lot of offenders, and I really know quite quickly from conversations whether people are serious about what is called rehabilitation or rebuilding their lives. And the moment I know that they're serious, when they say to themselves or to me or to an employer or anyone else, you know, yes, I really did screw up. It was my fault. It was my responsibility that things went wrong. And once you said that, then the road to real rehabilitation and recovery and rebuilding a life becomes much, much more open. And those who are in denial about their crime or their mistake have a much tougher haul to rebuild their lives.
I think for many people, it will be hard to conceive as to why people can't see that they need to accept responsibility for their actions, even though there is an inclination in all of us to try and dodge it. I mean, you never have to teach a child to lie when they've done something wrong or to say, it wasn't my fault, do you? It comes naturally to us as human beings. But what are the sort of things, what are the sort of pressures that contribute and get in the way of people seeing that they need to accept it. They need to take it on board. What are the things that stop people accepting responsibility?
Well, I think one thing, which is very common, and indeed was one of my own faults, for a long time, people think they could get away with it if they deny. And of course, sometimes they're right, because the denials sometimes work. They, of course, don't work in the sight of God, who knows everything, but in the sight of the world, the sight of people who are perhaps inclined to be critical but are willing to be converted or at least non-judgmental, you can sometimes get away with things. So that's number one. Number two, I think pride plays a huge part in denying things. Quite early on in my prison journey, I was warned off talking to a particular prisoner with the words, "Don't listen to him, he's a double Richard." I had no idea what that meant. But when it was translated from prison slang, Richard III equals bird. A double Richard is someone who's doing his prison sentence, twice over. Why? Because this particular man, and he's a fairly common type, was so busy denying everything. And he would, for example, blame the police for firming up the verbals. He would blame the judge for being harsh. He would blame the other members of the gang for being so incompetent and let him down. Someone else already was responsible. He'd completely forgotten he'd done the crime himself.
Yeah.
And so, and this is not an uncommon failing. Deny, 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 because it seems for a while at least easier than taking responsibility.
And do you think, and you and I have been walking around the track of this life for a few years now, do you think that there is a greater sort of willingness to try and assign responsibility elsewhere now? Do you think there's more of a sort of societal tendency to say it's always someone else's fault and never mind, governor, rather than accept what we've done wrong?
Well, I think it depends where you are. Politicians don't get a lot of credit these days for things, but all competent, good politicians are actually not bad at taking responsibility for the simple reason that they know, if they're ministers, that they might have to be answerable to Parliament. And that can take the form of having to answer parliamentary questions, or it can happen that you are subjected to a debating motion, at worst, a motion of censure. I once had a motion of censure put down on me when I was defence minister for something to do with which dockyard I'd chosen to be the one where our submarines were refitted. Actually, I loved that debate because I had worked very hard at the reasons why I'd taken that decision, but didn't mind at all. It was quite rough and tumble. A lot of shouting from Scotsmen who thought I should have given the dockyard to Scotland. But never mind that. I think politicians are not bad at taking responsibility because they should know that the prize of rising in politics as you become a minister, a senior minister, prime minister, actually you have to take responsibility. And President Harry S. Truman in the United States had a sign on his desk that said the buck stops here. And it actually does in politics. Now, there are a lot of professions which that isn't true. And, for example, within, say, the NHS, there is often a tremendous spread of responsibility. Did the pathologist get it wrong? Did the nurse get it wrong? Did the anaesthetist get it wrong? Did the assistant surgeon get it wrong? Goodness knows. But I sometimes think when I hear some of the NHS stories, stories that have gone wrong, that it's very easy to spread the responsibility. Yes. Maybe genuinely, I just don't know, but I think it is easier in some worlds to get out of. And so in the civil service, for example, the kind of way it works, that no civil servant usually gets blamed for things that mistakes inside the system. So there's plenty of space for avoiding responsibility.
But it does seem to my memory that there used to be a greater willingness for those who were in charge to accept that they had ultimate responsibility, even if they weren't directly connected with what had happened. And I mean, there are very famous sort of stories about politicians where a leak has occurred around a budget or something like that, and the Chancellor comes along and delivers his budget and then promptly resigns, not because he was responsible for the leak, but because he was in charge. He was the one who ultimately carried the can. And I wonder whether we have that same willingness to accept our duty of responsibility in this modern age, or are we looking to say, it wasn't down to me?
Well, I think you put a finger on something to do with really the passage of time and the changing culture. Just on politics, and I obviously know something about that world, there was a greater willingness to accept responsibility. There's a famous case called the Critchell Down affair, when a minister who hadn't really had much to do with it accepted responsibility for mistakes of his civil servants who had quite wrongly taken land away from a landowner and made all kinds of grave mistakes. And I think episode of the budget leak to which you refer was to do with a Chancellor called Dalton, who had rather unwisely, on the way into his budget, spoken to a journalist called Carville and let a secret out, and had never realised that Carville would be so quick on the draw as to get it in print before the budget was finished. And so he did resign over that. But I think there is with the change of the age and the change of culture, I think there is a greater enthusiasm for the practice of avoiding responsibility if you can get away with it.
Can we talk a little bit about your own experience? Because obviously this here is relevant. I mean, as we've alluded, and for those who maybe don't know something of your story, you were politician of long standing. You were Minister of State for Defence initially. You also worked in Treasury, didn't you? John Major's government was the government that you were Minister of Defence for. And as you said, you went to prison. And the reason that you went to prison was because, and I'm kind of quoting from your own website in this, because I love the fact that on your own website you acknowledge the reality of your journey. You don't try to hide from it, which I think is very important. But you went to prison because you lied in a libel case about who had paid a hotel bill. There was a link to a Saudi arms deal, all that sort of thing. And I wonder, when you look back now from the position you're in now, and the position as a person of faith now, and as an Anglican minister now, you look back to the Jonathan Aitken that trod the corridors of power. What was your attitude towards honesty and integrity and responsibility back in those days?
Well, I obviously failed the test, but the test should have been, is this true? And if it is true, you'd better accept it. And if I look back now to what brought me down, it was really, the issue was really quite minor. I hadn't broken any law, I hadn't broken any rule, but there was a line of guidance which was along the lines of a minister should avoid anything which could cause, I forget the actual wording of the phrase, but cause too much controversy on a personal front. And what I had done was to accept the hospitality of a man I knew extremely well, a Saudi prince, who had paid for my hotel bill in Paris for 2 nights at the cost of about £800. Now, for various reasons, there were lots of ways I could have handled that. I could have said, yes, I accepted the bill, but I know this man very well. I've had him as my guest in various places. I didn't realize this was anything seriously wrong, but I gladly now repay the £800. That would have been the wisest way. And I don't think anybody, apart from 2 days of bit of flapping in the media, would have said this is defining issue. This is not a serious issue. It's a judgment issue, and you say I got the judgment wrong. So I could easily, and I think quite honorably, have extricated myself. Instead, oh, woe is me. So this is such a minor matter, and there's no proof at all of who paid this hotel bill. I'll swat it away with a little lie. And perhaps there wasn't any such thing as a little lie. The old nursery rhyme, oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. And you get into a lie, then you have to lie again, and then you have to keep on defending the lie. And then you actually defend it in a lie in court, which is perjury. And that's why I crashed and fell from grace. But if you look back on it, the starting point was really quite small and could have been dealt with quite honorably and easily. And it was my folly, my arrogance to think I could get out of it by telling a lie.
Yeah, and what was it then? Because you said that at the time, and I mean, it was when I think it was The Guardian and World in Action were sort of taking you to task about these things, and that's why it ended up in court. But you said at the time the actual issue was a relatively small one. If I'd acknowledged it, I would have probably survived politically. You said I should have learnt from Nixon because it was the cover-up was the issue. So why didn't you? Why didn't you learn from Nixon? What was it compelled you to try and dodge responsibility on that? And I think the phrase you used, you would take up, ironically, the sword of truth to defend yourself in this. I mean, you really did just dug the hole deeper and deeper, didn't you? What drove you to that?
Well, the Sword of Truth speech, which I have to watch with great embarrassment, actually was referring to some other things mainly, which were much, much more serious, the notion that I was some sort of corrupt arms dealer. But you can't pick and choose on a menu of truth and say some things are true and some things are untrue. What made me, as it were, tough it out or lie it out? I think the answer is pride and arrogance. I thought I could win and defeat those who were criticizing me, attacking me, by hanging tough. It would have been infinitely wiser, in the wisdom of hindsight, to simply put my hands up at that stage. Not a great big deal. And I would have, I think, not ruined my political career at all.
Was that
pride and arrogance.
Was that a cultural thing, do you think? I mean, because we are all affected by, and I know that, subsequently you have come to a life-changing experience of faith. Your life now has gone in a completely different direction. The standards that you apply to yourself, the biblical standards you apply to yourself, are very different. So I understand that. But we all are influenced by the culture that we inhabit. And I wonder if that there was almost a pressure, a peer pressure even, to actually not accept where we'd gone wrong, to try and just bluff our way through. Was that a cultural thing at the time for government?
Well, I think it's a cultural thing with some individuals, including me. I mean, I think the problem of the political life is that it puffs you up with hubris and pride and arrogance as you go along. It's very nice. You go back to your constituents, everyone says, oh, our member is here. It's such an honor to have our member pouring out the coffee cups or drawing the raffle, get a bit higher, get into government. Yes, minister, say all the civil servants. And then they get a bit higher and say, oh, the Secretary of State has been so wise as John. So the system puffs you up. And it's a wise person who manages to stay real and stay humble. But it's, I think, easy to fall into the trap of hubris and arrogance because, to some extent, it goes with the territory and is in the culture.
At what point did you come to terms, accept the ability to own what you had done? And What difference did that make for you in that moment of redefining how you're going to think about this?
The answer is I came to my senses when I got caught out. And it was fairly dramatic the way I was caught out. I went all the way through, almost to the end of the libel case, lasting weeks. And despite great efforts to crack the story that I might not have paid the Ritz bill myself, whatever doubts anyone might have had, no one had cracked the story. No one had come anywhere near proving that my hotel bill had been paid by somebody else. There simply wasn't evidence. And then suddenly, out of the blue, a discovery was made about air tickets, rather complicated, but it meant that my wife could not possibly have paid the bill because she was on an airline going somewhere else at the time. And once that evidence was produced,
yes,
1 minute to midnight in the trial, I knew that the game was up. I knew that my life had dramatically changed and was really over as the life I knew it. And I really immediately saw that. And it took time to do things like put in a confession statement to the police. It took time to plead guilty. But actually, I did all those things as quickly as I could have done, realistically, given the slow-moving nature of the system. So I think once I was caught out, I don't think I would really fault myself for coming to terms with reality and owning up and putting my hands up.
And did that bring a change to the way that you were thinking, the way that you were viewing your life? I mean, there's that phrase from the Bible, isn't there? You know the truth and the truth will set you free. Now, I know in very real terms the truth incarcerated you, but did it also set you free from what had been driving your life in the sort of direction that made you think it was acceptable just to lie, not to accept responsibility, to try and bluff it out? Did it set you free from that, to give you the opportunity for a different perspective?
Well, it did in one sense set me free, in that I knew at last I had done the right thing, I had told the truth. But there are huge complications. For example, I went through a period which I sometimes refer to as defeat, disgrace, divorce, bankruptcy, and jail. Now, in that downward spiral, some people got really badly hurt, starting with my family. I mean, and so I think the idea it set me free would require some careful elaboration, because it set me into a whole range of disastrous problems. And in the end, it did set me free. And to this day, I'm gloriously free of the baggage of the past. But at the time, it just was very difficult to see your world crashing around you. My family were wonderfully supportive and loyal, but they lost their home. They lost a father going into jail. It was rough on a lot of people, and I felt I'd let a lot of people down. So I didn't feel set free. I think I felt extremely remorseful for a very long time. But in the end, yes, you're right. The truth did set me free.
And does society, do we, perhaps especially within the church, do we do enough to allow people a way back from failure? Do we allow for failures not only to be made, but then to be owned? Because I suppose if we don't, it's no wonder that people try and cover them up.
Well, I quite understand why anyone might prefer trying the cover-up route to the admission and called confession route, because there are great pains with that. But on the other hand, of course, the confession or admission route is the right route. And you ask about the church. I mean, I can't complain at all. While I was in prison, I was accepted by Wycliffe Hall and Anglican Theological College at Oxford to become a student for a degree in theology. And then eventually, although I wasn't seeking it, I was, of course, accepted for ordination and to become a prison chaplain. So I have no complaints with the church, but a lot of people, I think, do fear that the church is not at all free of judgmentalism, far from it. And the road to redemption, which should be a fast track, is often a very slow and painful track. And mind you, my own sort of recovery did take some years. And today, there'll probably be people tuning into this broadcast who might well say, oh, that ghastly guy Aitken, he's a hypocrite, really. He's just all doing a performance to please the listening audience. I don't learn to live with that, because really, whether it's this broadcast or anyone's, I do it for an audience of one, and he knows very well what's going on.
And really, I mean, is that because we're going back a few years now to when you were in the papers? We're talking it was the early 80s, wasn't it, when this all happened? Do you still get that reaction from some people?
Well, much less is the answer. I mean, I used to get it sort of fairly often. I'm sure that when I get up to speak in an audience, in fact, I heard it the other day, said I was talking in a place called Hungerford in Berkshire to quite a large audience, but I had a letter afterwards, a nice letter, which began along the lines of, when you arrived and got up to speak, I thoroughly disliked you and knew you were a humbug or something like that. But by the time at the end of the talk, this guy had come round. But nevertheless, in his or her mind at the time.
That's amazing, isn't it? But I suppose that it kind of leads me to my next question or my next thought, though, because we often hear, and I've been known to say it in my program myself, when there's been all sorts of stuff going on and people have been, whether they be politicians, leader of business, whether it be bankers, whether it be celebrities, whether it be church leaders, and you kind of go, look, just tell the truth and say you're sorry. That's all we want. But it seems as though people find it so hard to do. And so I wonder whether actually we have created that environment, whether society has created that environment where people, especially people in the public eye, don't feel able to be honest about their fallibility and their failures.
Well, it is easier, if you can get away with it, to tough it out and go on covering up, because if that works, it may be very bad for the soul and the conscience, but it has succeeded to the extent that you're still there, you're still in your job, you're still surviving. I think in the end, these issues are deeply personal to do with the human soul. But I know that there is great satisfaction in the end. Well, I did fess up. I did apologize. I did come clean. And even if there are still some people who don't quite believe you, I was watching on television, as millions were, yesterday, some man from the post office who said he was sorry for having cheered when somebody went to jail. And then the lady came on and said, I don't accept his apology. And I felt some sympathy for both of them. I thought the man I gave him the credit probably was a genuine apology. I could absolutely understand why the lady did not want to accept it, because we hear an awful lot of apologies which do sound a bit hollow.
Yes.
Convenient. But I think, and I'm sure probably at the beginning, some of my apologies and mea culpas may have sounded a bit hollow. They were genuine, but I could see at least why people weren't able to accept it. Passage of time, I think, helps.
Yeah. There are lots of areas where we have sort of realms of responsibility. I mean, we all have personal responsibilities, family responsibilities, vocational work responsibilities, community responsibilities, societal, wider world responsibilities. All those things sort of come together for all of us, and taking responsibility for that which is our responsibility is important. Equally, not carrying responsibility for the things which are beyond our ability to influence is important as well. But I wonder if we might, in our final thoughts, consider our responsibility towards the truth, towards when other people are not accepting responsibility for their actions. I mean, what are your thoughts from your own experiences in government, as a prison chaplain, your personal experience, your wider awareness of this? What are your thoughts around the way in which some people are willing to turn a blind eye to things that are blatantly going on? Should we be more willing to be a whistleblower, a speaker of truth, and hang the consequences?
I think I've learned the hard way that truth is supreme, and telling the truth is the ideal and the right way to go. I at least understand why some people are reluctant to do that. And, for example, if you're part of a team, let's say, of prison officers, and there is a bit of violence towards a prisoner, no one wants to blow the whistle on a team of people who are often good men or good women who are prison officers. One of them has done the wrong thing, so they hide away from the truth. And at least you can understand why they do that. It's wrong, and the whistleblower is usually right. But at least there are some grey areas when it's right to blow the whistle or how it's right to blow the whistle. You don't have to blow the whistle by going off to a tabloid newspaper. You can blow the whistle by internally starting the procedures which will lead to a proper evaluation or investigation. And I think that's probably what happens when, for example, what's going on right now about what happened in the Tavistock clinic about the treatment with beta blockers of young kids and their sexuality. I think I wish the whistle had been blown a lot earlier on some of that. So I'm in favour of truth coming out. I'm in favour of whistleblowing, but I think there are ways of blowing the whistle.
And is there a sense in which we almost need to, as a society, learn again that it is a civic responsibility to draw back the veil if truth or untruth needs to be uncovered?
Yes, I think that is true. And if I'd been, with the wisdom of hindsight, a nurse in one of these clinics doing gender reassignment through beta blockers, I would think probably now I think, well, I wish I'd said something earlier. I had some qualms, I had some doubts, but I didn't say anything. I wish I had. So you're right that on the whole, the sooner the truth comes out, the better, because once the truth is out, the situation can then be looked at, and when things have gone wrong and need to be stopped, they can be stopped. So sooner the better. How the whistle is blown, how the truth comes out, there's some debate about that. But
and of course, the reality is within, I mean, the example that you give there, one of the things of the report that's come out just recent to our time of recording is that the people who were involved and the people who had concerns, they almost felt by the nature of the debate that was going on and the coverage that there was in the news and the proclamations from a whole host of voices around this that was in sort of contemporary media awareness, a lot of people said they almost felt bullied into not being able to speak up, bullied to keep quiet, regardless of their personal convictions. So I wonder if there is then, as you are a man of the cloth, is there a Christian responsibility? Is there a church responsibility? Do we have a role to help others take responsibility for the reality of what is going on, whether it's positive or negative, and to respond to that in an appropriate way?
Yes, I think that why people, for these kind of situations we're discussing, and let's go back perhaps to that case where a nurse murdered a number of babies in one particular hospital, and people knew about that and started to have qualms and doubts expressed them, but they were, it seems, pressured into keeping silent. And that pressure looks terribly wrong now. So why should someone speak up? Because their conscience tells them to. Who put conscience there? Well, we Christians believe that God is the voice of conscience. And so definitely it is a Christian duty to speak the truth and to come out and to say what the truth is boldly, even though it causes some trouble at the time. When the apostles first proclaimed the truth in the early days of Christianity, they were very unpopular in some circles, which is why they were persecuted and so on. So this is as old as Christianity itself, this pressure to keep silent. But voices of conscience, godly voices, do speak out.
So how do we create an environment, and perhaps particularly within the church, how do we create an environment of assured honesty that assures and ensures that those who want to speak out will be supported, that those who feel the need to proclaim truth where it is not desired in a wider society will be supported? What can we do to give people, perhaps even in our local churches, to give people the reassurance that they will be, that they should do that, to encourage them to do that?
Well, we live in a free country. It's one of our huge strengths. And one of those freedoms is, of course, to speak out fearlessly. And it's easier, perhaps, to do it in the knowledge that we have, as part of our free society, a system with a free press and so on, which are the detectives of democracy and find things out. But how do you create a climate? It's a very good question. I think when you look at some of these public inquiries about things that have gone wrong, you see that, well, there is going to be probably an accountable system one day, whether it's the Grenfell fire or whether it's what happened in some hospital. There is, at the end of the day, often in our free society, an accountability. But getting to that point, there's an often painful period of darkness and suppression of the truth, and sometimes bullying into suppressing the truth. And that's a very dark experience, anyone who's gone through that. And I feel for anyone who has. But I think changing the climate, I think climate probably is changing, whether it's the post office or bits of the NHS. The truth does come out. The truth does set people free. But getting there is painful, and it takes courage to go through that pain.
Let's be honest. There is a natural inclination in the vast majority of human beings, if not all, to try and dodge responsibility. To say, it wasn't me, Gov, when we do something wrong. To lie, to try and cover our tracks. And to try and bluff it out and bluster it out if we get caught as well. But If Mary Astor was right when she said the truth is strong and sometime or other will prevail, surely we need to recognize the futility of the cover-up, the lie, because sooner or later things come out, sometimes decades later, where infidelity, failing, shortcoming, falls are revealed. Surely part of our responsibility is to create a culture where people are able to say, I got it wrong, please forgive me, and then to be forgiven and restored so that they can carry on living their life. If we don't have that sort of environment within the church, and that doesn't mean just brushing bad behavior under the carpet, there needs to be an addressing of the issues. But if we do not have that sort of positive culture, surely we just create a culture that encourages people to deny responsibility, to try and lay it off on someone else, to protect themselves by covering it up, which often means they dig a deeper hole, and sometimes their inappropriate, abusive, sinful behaviors develop and go on unchecked. How can we create a better attitude towards responsibility? Maybe by taking our own responsibility to speak truth and also to deal well with those who fall. You've been listening to UCB Life Issues. My guest, and you can find out more about him by going to his website, is the Revd Jonathan Aitken. JonathanAitken.org. Jonathan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Paul.
I'm Paul Hammond, and thank you also to Rachel, my producer, for this week's Life Issues. Why not join us next week for another one? Ta-da!